Welcome to The Favorites, the podcast, part of the Volume Podcast Network. I am Chad Millman of the Action Network. Today I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my companion, my compadre, my BFF, professional bettor, Simon Hunter. Hello, Simon.
Chad, how we doing?
Dude, we got some serious football betting to discuss because the NFL schedule came out last week. Lines are posted for every single game. Team totals are posted for games. Like the action to get down already for week one has been insane. It's become a highlight for fans, the schedule released during the sort of doldrums of the NFL offseason. They've really nailed this. The NFL also offers gamblers a chance to discuss this upcoming season from a variety of new angles. Returning to the show to discuss many of those angles is one of our favorite guests with our favorite mustache. He's an NFL predictive analyst, one of the originals, a proponent of all things data, the impresario of sharp football analysis.com, Mr. Warren Sharp. What's up, buddy?
Hey, thanks for having me, Chad, Simon. Pleasure to be back with you guys. Always love this time of year because we get to break down the schedule. And like you mentioned, lines out on all these games. Everything's super fresh. It's never going to be any fresher than it is over the past, week or so. So happy to dive into it with you guys.
Well, listen, one of the reasons we love to have you on is because your preseason Bible is a must for football fans because you go so deep on every team, every new addition, how these teams did against the spread, what they do on offense, defense, all the rest metrics that we're going to get into today. You are very graciously offering listeners of the favorites the Bible, Sharp Football Analysis, the preseason Bible, for $1. Use code ACTION. Go to sharp.football. That's right, sharp.football.
Sharp.football. It'll have a link up at the top. You can go right to the purchase page, enter in the code ACTION, drops the price from $35 down to $1. So you're not going to get a better deal than that. And I can guarantee you're not going to find a better use today for $1 than pre-ordering the book for when it comes out the beginning of July.
$1, the ROI on that dollar, God only knows. You've got to be wise, but that is going to be a huge ROI. All right, NFL schedule, it's out. We're going to get to that in a second. Spring meetings happening as we speak. So many, rules changes being proposed. Everyone's talking about the tush push, but there's also proposals for playoff seating structure. Simon, I'll start with you. How do you feel about a change to the seating structure? And how would that impact the way you think about not just the playoffs, but also how teams sort of work the regular season from a betting perspective?
Bunch of different ways to come at it. The main part I don't like about it is I feel like they're trying to take away something we all love as bettors, which is home dogs in the playoffs. Like that 8 and 9 team in the playoffs at home playing against a team that's going to be much more talented, right? The 5 seed usually is going to be better than the 4 seed. It's taking something away from us, right? Like, again, it rarely matters overall, right? But there's always those unique spots that there is a team that is terrible, makes it in the playoffs and somehow pulls off a huge upset, which we all talk about all the time. Beastquake. Like, that's the game that will forever stick out to anyone that's a real big-time bettor. That Seahawks was a big dog playing against a Drew Brees-led team, which, as a bettor, pretty simple, right? You're getting Drew Brees going from indoor to outdoors against a team that thrived on strong defense with a good run game. It was like very easy for bettors to see, but the general public didn't see it that way. So those are ones that pop out to me. And, we saw last year with that great team down in Washington making that run, Chad. That was a team that, did it all on the road. So those are things I love and I love to see happen, but I get it. I'd be pissed too if I was a really good team and I'm having to play all my road games rather than, being at home. So pretty interesting shakeup, but I think that the Vikings, Detroit, I don't know. I don't like that they're proposing and this actually might happen, but we'll see what the rule is, Chad. It's a big deal for sure, though.
Warren, you're a pretty connected guy. Do you have thoughts on if this has a real chance at passing?
At first, I thought it was going to have a great chance. I think now that the pressure from Goodell is going to be very strong on this to pass, but I'm not quite sure that we're going to get enough buy-in yet from some of the teams in those divisions that stink, like the AFC South, for example, who love to have that 4 seed when they get to the playoffs and would lose that 4 seed if they pass this rule, because that team then would probably be 7 seed or 6 seed. And that's a big issue for those teams. But I felt like that this rule should pass because Goodell wants it to pass. I mean, as we're going to be talking about momentarily, this league is now built on making revenue and getting people to watch their games on TV so that their ratings go high, so that they can get new deals in the future. And this will make those week 18 games better. But to Simon's point, from betting on those games, one of the things that we are able to do is get all that insight a little bit before maybe the general public is this coach going to rest his players week 18? Is this how many snaps is this first team going to play? Now, if they do this, we're going to have less teams resting in week 18. I mean, there was a slide that they presented at the ownership meetings that showed that the Houston Texans went into week 18 locked into the 4th seed. But if this new system had passed, they could have finished anywhere from 4th to 7th seed last year. The LA Rams went into week 18 last year as the number 3 or the 4 seed. They also decided to rest starters. But if this had passed, they could have been anywhere from the 4th to the 7th seed. Even the Philadelphia Eagles, they were locked in as the 2 seed in this adjusted system. They could have fallen to the 3rd seed with a loss. And so those 3 teams decided to rest starters in week 18. This new system would given them more of a desire to play guys. And so I actually think it might be like the Players Association that would feel the strongest, like, hey, our guys should deserve a little bit of a rest. We don't need to change this up for the NFL to get new ratings, for the owners to line their pockets more, even though eventually it does trickle down to the players. So I think it's going to be fascinating. I totally disagree, though, Chad, with this contingent of people who think that this is going to, yes, it sort of makes divisions less important, but it's not going to throw everything out. Like, this is, to me, this is not something that is going to make teams less likely to play hard. These teams in the strong divisions are still going to be playing to try to get their seeding. And the teams in the weak divisions, you think if a team is in first place in the AFC South and they're like, oh, well, we're not going to get a 4th place, they're still going to be playing to not play the 7th place playoff schedule, the 6th place playoff schedule. They may not be able to get the 4th place spot, but they're still going to be trying to play for a higher seed. So I don't see how this makes the teams less likely to try hard.
I like the idea, actually. I like having more of an opportunity in the regular season to have one more week with a full slate that offers betting windows, right? Because the scenario that you just talked about, Simon, it's becoming less and less. We love betting the playoffs. We killed in the playoffs this year. But I don't mind having a lot more games to look at in the final weekend of the regular season. I think that's kind of fantastic.
Brother, we just had the Rams as the dog against the Vikings.
That was amazing, and we killed it.
Right. That's what I mean. So, like, that was a nice opportunity. We're going to lose that opportunity, dude. That would have been a Vikings home game. I get where they're coming from. Again, all these different proposals, each one's different, right? Some of them, it only matters if a team's below 500. Some of them, they're only going to reseed after the first round. Like, like you said, there's a lot of things being pushed today. The tush push, like, it sounds like the tush push is more likely to get put through than this one is, because it seems like a lot of owners fucking hate the tush push because their team can't do it, and the Eagles obviously couldn't be stopped. So, like, Green Bay being the team to go and propose this tush push ban, that makes more sense than other teams agreeing to this reseeding, because it's like, I'd be bitter too. It's an automatic play that a team has a huge advantage on. I get why they're trying to ban that. I just don't, like you said, the revenue thing, that makes more sense than anything else for this, trying to change these playoff schedules.
Warren, you've cornered the market on the idea of rest advantage. And when you look at the schedule now, how do you handicap the teams have done that have gotten a rest advantage versus the teams that don't?
Well, rest certainly matters. There have been changes in the way that the league has divvied up the schedule this year to help increase the equity a little bit. I do think that they did a little bit of a better job this year than they have in years past. Some years I've come on your show this time every May and pounded my hand on the table and said, "This is ridiculous. They keep making it worse. I don't know where the light at the end of the tunnel is, but things are just ripping my hair out with how terrible it is." It's still not great, but it's better than what it was last year. I'll say that. It has improved a little bit last year. There are still 101 games being played where one team has a rest advantage over an opponent, which is the identical number to what it was last year. But the haves and the have-nots, it's gotten a little bit closer to even. So we're not seeing as many teams skewing to one end of the spectrum or the other. So that's a positive. We'll talk momentarily about some of the teams that got screwed the most or the most benefits. But one of the things that has changed, and the league sort of pointed this out when they were doing a little bit of analysis of the schedule and rest in the schedule, is that bye weeks have certainly become less beneficial, especially to bet on, than they had in the past. In the past, prior to 2011, we had major advantages from bye weeks, and you could cover the spread 56% of the time if you were just betting on the team that was off of a bye. That no longer exists because that 2011 CBA forces 4 mandatory days off on bye weeks. And there are teams and coaches that used to give their players 1 day off in a bye week and get ready for the next day. We got a big game coming up. Okay, everybody, you can go home. Don't come back until, the day after tomorrow. But otherwise, now they're getting all this time off. The coaches are getting out of rhythm from a play calling perspective. I don't know about you guys from the way that you've been betting things over the last couple of years, but I certainly have ran into a couple of problems where I would be liking a team for a certain game, knowing they're coming off of a bye, thinking that would provide a little bit more of an edge. But what ends up happening is that team shows up rusty, out of sync. Their play calling strategies are a little bit different than what they were finishing as they went into the bye. And all of a sudden, I'm betting on a team that I wasn't expecting to be out there on the field. And that's happened several times. And, I just kicked myself, I remember this team's coming off of a bye. Those teams are becoming a little bit more fade material, hitting, covering the spread like 47, 48% of the time, as opposed to 56%, which is massive. So identifying, Chad, the situations where rest is beneficial and isolating the situations where rest may not be as beneficial, that's become a little bit more important over the last several seasons, in my opinion. But there certainly are spots where teams are just league-wide getting screwed with rest or getting rest advantages. Holistically, we know that short week road games are a bad thing for teams. But since 2021, so just over the last 4 years, a team like the San Francisco 49ers has had to play 10 such games, whereas other teams have only played 2 such games over the last 4 years. So there isn't necessarily a desire to balance this stuff out at the minute level. And that's where, I would like to see it be more fair, but we now know that the NFL doesn't prioritize that. What they're prioritizing is big teams playing one another in big games, which is why we have ridiculous schedule this Christmas and Thanksgiving, and they're in it for the ratings. They want to get, they want to be able to promote that they broke the records ratings. I even heard Mike North come out and say, we want to hit 50 million viewers on the Thanksgiving night game where Dallas plays the Kansas City Chiefs, which would break all of the records. And the reason that they're looking to do that is because they want to sell a standalone pay-per-view game on DAZN or on Tubi or God knows what other network, so they then can make more money in the future. So that's what they're prioritizing. They say as long as rest isn't too inequitable, then it's okay. But who's to define too inequitable? It's their own decision as to what's too inequitable. And that's why we need to sort of act as watchdogs and look out for the schedule and look out for the rest and just make sure that they're not, when they are screwing teams like they are, and we'll discuss, we point that out so that hopefully those teams get a little bit of benefit in the future.
All right. So you brought up sort of it used to be an auto play, and now it's becoming less and less of that to bet these teams coming off the bye. Evan did some research for us. Last season, teams with a rest advantage were actually one game under 500, 54, 55 straight up. And then they were 13 games under 500 against the spread. That's the second worst mark against the spread since 2000. And by the way, since PASPA was repealed in 2018, 51% straight up, 48% against the spread. So that is a losing bet since 2018, betting teams with the rest advantage. To your point, is it because they haven't been equitable? But let me ask Simon, how have you been thinking about teams coming off a bye or teams having rest advantages the last couple of years?
It's a bunch of ways. Like I told you, I use Warren's book as a major tool for what I'm doing, and that is the sense of adjusting to season win totals and different things like that. Like that Eagles team last year, all the players talked about going to Brazil week 1. They felt like they couldn't catch up and get their heads right until their bye week, which was after week 4. And you hear every player talk about that, where it's like they couldn't catch their breath. It was just really intense going from your preseason, trying to make the team, get ready for the upcoming season, to you're going to a foreign country. Now you're coming back, and now you're playing, multiple road games. You have a home game here and there. It's a lot, and the bye week helped them catch up. You look at the schedule this year, there's tons of teams having that exact scenario. Long distance travel, a lot going on, and a lot to deal with when they get back. And, for me, I remember last year one that really jumped out was Warren was on it. It was about the Chiefs. The Chiefs got the worst deal we've ever seen any football team get last year, right? They had the most insane schedule, Saturdays, Wednesdays. I mean, I think the only day they didn't play was Tuesday. They might even add a Tuesday game. I don't even know. But it was just insane how their schedule was set up. They were perfect. So we talked on here about that, where there's certain teams we do think it'll affect, and there's other teams with veteran quarterback and veteran head coaches that their leadership can balance that, right? That rest disparity. But there's other teams that it does affect, where we just talked about a young Eagles team. They started 2-2, right? They lost to a not very talented Kirk Cousins in that Atlanta team, and then to a Saints team that we all know were terrible. I mean, not the Saints, Tampa Bay were pretty good, but still close game with the Saints start the season. So it just shows how early in the year these teams, they're not going to be who they are, especially when they're traveling like they are. So, jumps out of the page, Chargers, Chiefs, that's a team that's going to Brazil week 1, right? Like we have a lot of things people can look at Warren's book about that type of stuff, where it's like those miles and that stuff does matter and can affect a lot of teams. So that's what's such a big deal to me reading Warren's stuff. It's like you have to look into each team's rest disparity. Even though it's not the end-all be-all, it's a major tool to have on hand.
One thing, Chad, I do want to throw in just some data. I know because you were mentioning Evan Abrams' great research. I just want to throw in some nuggets here real quick before we get into team discussion and other situations. Just the specifics. If you are off of a bye week from 2002 to 2010, you were covering the spread 56% of the time, 7.6% ROI. Since 2017, you are covering the spread 46% of the time, minus 12.2% ROI. So a massive difference off of the bye. The situations where you want to be looking, and Simon mentioned this too about the Chiefs. What I have found is that the better team, usually, obviously in these games, is going to be favored. Favorites, when they have extra rest, that edge becomes amplified. Bad teams that may have extra rest, it doesn't necessarily help them. They don't know the right strategies to use during that extra rest or to take advantage of to get to the level of the good teams. So favorites tend to do a little bit better when they do have extra rest than underdogs or than bad teams do. The other spots to think about here are the short week road games, which we are going to discuss. Short week road games, the last 10 years, those teams, that means like they're playing Sunday and then they play on Thursday on the road, which happens a lot this year. Those teams have covered the spread just 48.3% of the time, which is minus 7.8% ROI over the last 10 years. That's a big deal, 48% cover rate. can be a solid spot to bet against these teams, especially when other factors play into it. If that same team, instead of goes on the road, instead of having short rest, they actually have a little bit extra rest than their opponent, all of a sudden they become 54.7% ROI, 54.7% cover rate, which is positive 4.4% ROI. A couple other spots to be aware of. It only happens once this year. 3 games in 10 days. That last game is absolutely brutal. It's a very low sample size. It's going to happen to the Dallas Cowboys once this year, actually on Thanksgiving. Those teams, when it's happened, they're something like 2-9, 2-10 in the last decade when they've played 3 games in 10 days, which hasn't happened very frequently. And then games after playing on the road Sunday or Monday night and having to come home and play an opponent that has not had to do that, 48.7% since 2013 across over 400 games. So we aren't talking about situations here that are going to scream, 60%, 65% cover rate. When you're talking about sample sizes that are a little bit larger, but it is meaningful when you're talking about, and Simon knows this, you know this, Chad, I don't really bet other sports, but I do know that there are people out there that whether they're betting NBA rest spots or MLB rest spots or situations where a team's gone on the road for all these games and then comes back home, there are spots and edges to be had just based upon general rest situations. So it is a key factor in the NFL, but the key is to understand when it is a factor and when it is not as big of a factor.
Well, what's interesting about that, and you guys have both just said this, is the NFL disadvantages the marquee teams in these scenarios because they want to put the marquee teams in the highest profile slots. And that's automatically going to be impossible to navigate to get them both rest and marquee slots. The teams that we've already talked about, the Cowboys, the Chiefs, historically the Niners have gotten screwed on this, right? Like the teams that the Eagles last year, right? Like those are the teams that we're always thinking about. So it's fascinating to me that all of a sudden you've got these insights and windows into, hey, these might be teams that even if historically we want to back them, this is a very specific spot where you might want to fade them because there could be value, especially if they're coming off some high profile games in which they might have won. So Warren, looking at the schedule, who wins, who loses when it comes to rest and spots right now?
Well, I'll tell you one spot that's terrible. This team is fine from an overall rest advantage, but just an example of how the NFL doesn't pay enough attention to this. The Cincinnati Bengals have to play on the road in Baltimore on a Thursday game. And that's the 3rd straight year that they have to play on the road in Baltimore on a Thursday game. And how many times have the Ravens gone into Cincinnati to play on the road on a Thursday game? One time since 2006. So we're talking one time in the last 19 years. But Cincinnati's had to do it now 3 straight years in Baltimore. By the way, Baltimore 9-0 hosting Thursday night home games. Most teams are really good when they host Thursday night games. Baltimore's terrible when they go on the road on Thursday. That 9-0 team at home turns into 2-7 on the road, but they get to host Cincinnati. It's unfair that they get to do that 3 straight years in a row. The NFL needs to, right that wrong next season, but you could try to make up for it like they're doing with the San Francisco 49ers rest this year. They're one of the top teams in the league after being screwed by minus 20 days or worse each of the last 2 seasons. We talked about them last year on your show, minus 22-day net rest differential, I think it was. And obviously their season unraveled mainly due to injuries, but rest didn't help. But it's one thing to go right the wrong, a couple of years later. The issue is trying to make it as balanced as possible in the moment and not have these situations happen because coaches' careers are on the line, a couple bad seasons because in some part rest is factoring into the fact that you're unable to win some of these games and all of a sudden you're out of a job. So it might help your successor when they right the wrong a couple of years from now, but it's not going to help you in the moment. The Detroit Lions are one of these teams that really stands out this season. It's ironic because they have such a brutal schedule. They have one of the most difficult schedules of opponents in the NFL, but the NFL doesn't define who you're going to play. That's all predetermined based upon where you finished last year and a rolling calendar that schedules out in advance, years in advance, what divisions you're going to play. The Lions are screwed from a strength of opponent perspective. But the NFL gave them 8 games where they have a rest advantage over their opponent. 8 games has never happened before in NFL history. This is an example of where, while the league has improved their scheduling a little bit, there are still areas that are notable and that they could improve further. Never before has a team played more than 6 games in a season with a rest advantage over their opponent. Detroit doesn't play just 7, they play 8. On top of that, they only play 1 game where they're at a rest disadvantage, thus a net of +7 games where they have a rest advantage over their opponent. They play 5 different games against an opponent who's coming off a Monday Night Football game on a short week. And those 5 games, you think about it, and I've talked to some players, when they get home on Monday night, it's actually Tuesday morning at that point in time, even if it's a home game. They're getting in Tuesday morning. They're starting their rehab. The Lions playing on a Sunday at 1 p.m., they have all evening Sunday to rest and rehab and start watching film. They have all day Monday to rest and rehab, watch the tape from yesterday, make their adjustments, figure out their game plan, and then they get Monday night to watch the opponent that they're going to play while the Lions are still rehabbing. This other team that they're playing has less time to rehab and also has less time to make adjustments based upon what happened. They're instantly looking forward to the next game as opposed to making some of those corrections based upon how they performed on Monday night. So it's a minor advantage. It's only 1 day of rest, but it is impactful over the course of, these minor edges added up over the course of entire season. No team has ever played 5 opponents off of Monday Night Football like the Detroit Lions are going to play. The other interesting factor about the Lions schedule specifically is the comparison, and unfortunately, Chad, your Chicago Bears are there in the NFC North, the comparison of the Detroit Lions and how they stack up with the rest of the North. Because, if you look at my net rest edges in the article that I wrote, a lot of the teams in the NFC West are up at the top. The 49ers, the Rams, the Cardinals. The NFL tried to help out the 49ers, I think, this year, right the wrongs of those minus 20 days. And so they also ended up helping out some of the other teams in their division simultaneously. But for the NFC North, the Lions are the only team that's getting these edges. If you look at their division, games with a rest edge, they have 8. No other team in their division has 4. Your Chicago Bears only play 2. Games with a rest disadvantage, I just mentioned, the Detroit Lions play only 1 such game. The Bears play 5 games with a rest disadvantage. And so if you look at the net, how many net games of rest advantage do you have? The Lions are at +7, 8 and 1, +7. The Bears and everybody else is 0 or worse. In fact, the Bears are -3. So that's just games with a rest advantage, the net games. The Lions are at +7 and your Chicago Bears are -3. We're talking about a 10-game span in a 17-game season. So I just don't feel like things like that are necessarily fair, pre-flop, and equitable. And the league should be looking at trying to make things a little bit more balanced, specifically within divisions, so that teams don't have such wide sweeping edges in rest like they do right now in the NFC North.
Simon, feels a little bit like a conspiracy theory from the NFL.
It is and it isn't, though, because, as someone that has lots of football debates, I feel like 90% of my life is conversations about football. People calling me off season. Are they going to call me to catch up, Chad? No. They're going to call me to give me some crazy idea and have a conversation about football. And, we always talk, especially with the old heads, about the Cowboys. Like, that's such a polarizing team that, even when they're not that good, they're still going to get 4 to 5 primetime games. And if they have a little bit of talent, they might get 6 or 7. Like, that's just a team the NFL loves. But because of that, professionals, have been on a steady fade of them since the 90s. Ever since they become America's team, really, they're always in these tough spots where they're not going to be great for a team, especially for their season. And this season, it's historical for them. The Cowboys are a team that have 4 Thursday games. That doesn't even sound real when you say it out loud, but it's true. And it's the NFL, you could say as a Cowboys fan, you could say, we have a raw deal. They're screwing us here. And I would agree. They really are, because Warren's telling you, that Thursday game, players talk all the time. Their bodies ain't right till that Thursday, Friday after a Sunday game. So they have 4 this year of short weeks. And, they finagled it, right? They give them back-to-back Thursdays. They try to make it work for them. But overall, that's something that really jumps out to me. That's a team I love this season, the Cowboys. A team whose win total I've been very heavy on, a team that I bet for division. And you're seeing why, because they have a tough schedule as well, like towards the end of the season, why their win total is what it is, Chad, 7.5, 8.5, because the NFL screws them with the schedule because they are America's team, and they're not getting any favors where the NFC East is playing really tough out-of-division games this season. So that's something I really can't wait to dive into when I get Warren's book about his outlook on this Cowboys team, because that was something that jumped out to me right away where it's like, man, I thought I was getting insanely good value. You see their schedule once it came out, it goes, okay, I get why that's such a low number, right? There's a lot of hype for Washington and the Eagles, but they also have a very tough schedule this upcoming season in Dallas.
What, Warren, you brought up the Niners, and Brock Purdy just signed this contract for $53 million a year. And the Niners historically have been successful because they've generally kept their costs under control, and they've kept their quarterback costs under control specifically. While this is an outsized contract, it's not like a break the bank for a quarterback contract. This year, when you look at the Niners from a rest advantage, and we've said earlier, they've been getting screwed on rest advantages for the past 3 years. And I do think it really came back to haunt them last year with players going down again and again and again and again. You look at the Niners, how do you position them in terms of rest? Because Simon and I have talked a lot about the Niners as being a team that we like as a futures bet.
Yeah, so the other thing too, you mentioned all those players going down. The one guy who should have probably gone down but didn't is a dog, Fred Warner, who broke his ankle in week 4 and played 100% of the snaps the next 7 straight games, did not miss a game for the rest of the season, even though the Niners only won 6 games and were eliminated from the playoffs. So if he, with his, and by the way, makes the Pro Bowl again.
And just signed a contract to make him the highest paid linebacker.
Well deserved. I mean, but to your point, where is all the money coming from? And the 49ers are one of those teams that's very top heavy. They have a lot of, I would say a lot. They have more studs than many teams do, and they're paying those studs what they deserve. So then they're going to have to get by with better players that are playing on their rookie deals to try to get a 53-man roster that is talented enough top to bottom that can withstand the rigors of an NFL season and produce success. The Niners have been generally solid when their guys are out on the field together. But I think last season, when you're talking about like Ayuk and Debo and CMC and Kittle, those guys were on the field with Brock Purdy, I want to say less than 40 snaps or something because of all of those injuries. And so when they're missing guys, that's when it becomes more difficult for Kyle Shanahan to elevate the rest of the players. And it makes a lot of sense. Kyle is such a genius when it comes to designing offense, but he's taking advantage. He's building everything into, I've got CMC here. Here's all the things I can do with CMC. Let's design unique things for CMC plus Kittle over here. And we're going to work off of this. We're going to use play action, whatever the case might be. And then when those guys aren't there and the players that are replacing them don't have the same level of skill set, Kyle's working many more steps behind than most other offenses are able to because they don't have such unique game plans designed to such unique, talented players. I mean, Kyle Juszczyk and George Kittle, 2 of the most unique players at their positions in the NFL that can do so much. The Niners, number one, we start with something that doesn't even involve rest, and that's just their general schedule. They play the easiest schedule of any team in the NFL because they had that rare, horrible season from a records perspective. They haven't played a schedule like this in a while. They haven't had a year where they've won only 6 games in a while. This is a team that's going to the NFC Championship more often than they're having a losing record. So this team has been successful. Now they get an easy schedule. Now their rest schedule, I've got them as the 4th easiest net rest edge schedule of any team this year. And if I look at some of the details here on the Niners, I rank them 5th best in total net rest edge. They don't have any massive edges, but they do play 4 games with more rest than their opponent, only 2 games with less rest than their opponent. And to Simon's point, and if you guys are on board with the 49ers, if they get their main players healthy, this team is a solid team. Everybody loves to hate Kyle Shanahan, but the key to me is this, and I said this before the draft. If they continue to botch their drafts, which they've done a little bit more than I think 49ers fans would like, that is why their team isn't getting over the hump, in my opinion. They needed to hit is a secret team that I felt really needed to hit in this year's draft to then be able to provide that lower end talent that's going to need to play some snaps when they're paying all those bigger named guys. So I've got higher expectations than most, I think, for the San Francisco 49ers because of their rest schedule, because of the strength of their schedule, but they're going to need this draft class to impact their 2025 season if they're going to get to where they need to get. I feel like paying Brock Purdy is fine because of what he has been able to deliver and how well he fits. He's obviously atypical. He's not a prototypical quarterback. He doesn't have the size and the stature back in the pocket. So people are going to say, well, this guy's not worth it. But for Kyle Shanahan, he's worth it. And so in this offense with Kyle, I'm fine with paying Brock Purdy. You just have to build up that bottom end of the roster.
Simon, now that we've seen the schedule, who they're playing, we've seen the win totals. We were talking a lot about the Niners before we saw any of this. It was sort of based on their team being bad last year and getting healthy and what their odds were. Has your opinion changed or is it strengthened? What's your status right now with the Niners?
Definitely strengthened because it was what we already knew the teams they were going to play. We just need to see how they were going to lay the schedule out for them. And then once you see the schedule, like Warren talked about, it's like the dream. Them and the Bills, to me, are two teams that really jumped out where the schedule really worked in their favor. And in the sense that this 49ers team, we talked about it, and Warren just alluded to it, that they needed to hit in these drafts because they've had to pay all these big-time players. And they're having to make it all work, Chad. And this to me feels like a really tight window here because we could either see them be a really good team this season or one or two more key injuries away at key positions, and then it all falls apart, right? Because they have not drafted well. And, we've seen teams like Detroit, Philadelphia, like these other teams in their conference that have drafted well, right? Hitting on big-time rookies that have progressed into year two. And that's something that's been lacking a little bit with that 49ers team. So to me, paying Purdy, we knew it was coming. The way the schedule broke, all of it, it's just lined up for this team. Like if McCaffrey's right, you got Salah back coaching that defense. Like it feels like it's all lined up for this team. And we know the Rams historically get off slow. So it's going to be all lined up for them. Like get out to a fast start, stay healthy. I mean, this is easy to be a team that can make another run. And that's why, you talked about them before the season started. Just they fit the exact same bill the Eagles fit the year before. Year from hell, tons of doubt from the public perception. We took the early value. The number already moved up, so we got good value on that number. We bet early. Now, everything Warren's telling me, it's making me feel good, where it's like, I want to hear other people saying they have the same view as I do, which is grading them out as a very easy schedule.
Do you have the latest number on the Niners Super Bowl odds? Well, I asked my next question, see if you guys can look it up or if someone in the chat can tell me what it is.
So they're basically when we opened it up, Chad, what did you think we got it at? Was it 20-1?
I think it was 20-1.
So that's what I think. We originally got it 20-1. I'm seeing most books now 15 and 16-1. So again, nothing crazy, but still, that's what we do it for. Like that plus 400 is a really nice something to hold on to.
I would not be afraid to still bet them at 15 or 16-1.
That's fair.
And I would not be surprised if come the start of the regular season, I love to do that round robin of the teams that are, I think, 12-1 or less.
Yeah.
I bet the Niners as the season goes on and more people take a bite of that 15 to 16-1, especially after listening to the show, because we move numbers, that it's going to get into that 12-1 range. It'll be, interestingly, I think it'll be the Lions, the Eagles, Niners, who are probably the three teams from the NFC with the shortest odds that'll be part of that round robin. You mentioned the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills. The Athletic did a story about this yesterday or 2 days ago. There are numbers for literally spreads for every game, right? We saw Raybon already put in a team total for the Eagles in the first game of the year in the app. Simon and I have bet the Cowboys at +7 and +240 against the Eagles in the first game of the year. But there are literally point spreads for every single game for every single week of the NFL season right now. The Buffalo Bills, the Athletic wrote about this the other day. The only team in the NFL that are favored in every single game. Put this in the favorites podcast Slack channel last night, and to make sure Matt Mitchell was aware, and he was not in a good place with this. But Simon, you think they're worthy of that?
Oh yeah, it's they're worthy of it. But I mean, Warren's probably the same mindset I have. That Ravens opening week, that's a gift. You're getting Lamar as a dog. It's not the playoffs. Like the playoffs, I got why the Bills had the number they had against Lamar. This is totally different. This is week one. Bills historically come out slow as well. And then we've seen it with Josh Allen that, he rallies the team and carries them with so much early in the season when the guys are just figuring it out. But to me, their interesting part of their schedule, Chaz, they play all the big dogs. Like they're playing the Eagles, a team that Josh Allen's never beat, and he's a favorite against them because he is at home, and he should be. It's interesting for them, though, that, last year they snuck up on us because they have $70 million in dead cap. We thought it was going to be a rebuilding year. This year, it seems like everyone's on board, right? They're what, minus 275, their division.
Yeah.
They're big-time Super Bowl bet for a lot of bookmakers right now. That's one of their biggest teams bet on right now by the general public. So the fact that this schedule broke the way it did, I love this for this Bills team. So yeah, if you're hedging and putting a lot of Bills Mafia, in your divisional parlays, I can't hate it right now. They just seem like a team that's going to easily get to 11, 12 wins the way the schedule's set up for them, Chad.
I might do a Bills Niners Super Bowl matchup bet right now before the number on the Niners drops even more. Get better odds on that. What do you think of that, Simon?
I love it.
Thank you. I
One
like when
thing,
you
one
agree with
thing,
me. It makes me feel vindicated and validated. Warren, give us your Bills take.
yeah, I was going to throw in on the Buffalo Bills. Part of the reason that they're favored in every single game is their four toughest games that they play this year are in Buffalo. So they play the Ravens, they play the Chiefs, they play the Eagles, and they play the Bengals. Those aren't easy games, but they're all in Buffalo. And so that definitely helps the Buffalo Bills. And then if you're talking about a team that needs to exceed their win total, obviously you want to play the toughest games at home where you're most likely to have a little bit of extra edge with your crowd. Easy games on the road are never a bad thing. And the Buffalo Bills play the number one easiest strength of schedule of opponents on the road of this entire season. Their road schedule is the easiest. So that's a positive. The only negative to throw in there is that the Bills from week 10 through week 18, they're playing 4 games at a rest disadvantage, only 1 game at a rest advantage. They are minus 10 days in net rest from week 10 onwards, which is the third worst of any team in the NFL down the stretch. But these games are week 10 versus the Dolphins. They're at a rest disadvantage of 3 days. Week 14 versus the Cincinnati Bengals. They're at a rest disadvantage of 3 days. Week 15 against the Patriots. The very next week, they play the Patriots, who are off of a bye. We just mentioned while byes aren't great, it hasn't been as big of a benefit to most teams nowadays as it was back in the day. And then they play the Eagles week 17 at a 1-day rest disadvantage. So that rest isn't beautiful, but everything else with the way the schedule is falling for them, I think is really nice for the Buffalo Bills. And the other thing is, if you just look visually, I'm a very visual learner. I like looking at things visually. When I'm looking at the Buffalo Bills schedule, they have like clear tent poles on their schedule. Week 1, Sunday Night Football, Baltimore Ravens at home. Week 9, halfway through the season, Kansas City Chiefs at home. 2 weeks off after a bye week. They play the Carolina Panthers in the middle there. So they got plenty of time to rest and get healthy and focus on that since Kansas City Chiefs game. And then week 17, second to last week of the season, they play at home against the Philadelphia Eagles after playing the Cleveland Browns. So again, you're hoping that when you play the Cleveland Browns, when you play the Carolina Panthers, you're putting up some points early in that game. You're pulling out your guys a little bit early. You're getting healthy, rested, and focused on those other big games that you have. But there's only 3 of them, beginning, middle, and end of the schedule. So I do think it sets up very well for the Buffalo Bills. But it seems, guys, every single year, it's like, if not now, when? Like for the Buffalo Bills, it's always like, when is the time that they're finally going to get over the hump here? So maybe it's this year, but we've been saying that for several years now.
Look, we say that about the Bills. We say it about the Niners. You said the magic words, Warren. Carolina Panthers. in a look ahead spot for the Buffalo Bills. Oh my God. Simon,
Week 8.
I, I mean, like, I feel like that's week 8. I feel like we got to bet that game right now. Do you know what I mean? Like, like it just feels like that's candy. We got to take advantage of that. We
And
got
I
to
love
go
too,
into the
like there's so many things that just break Buffalo's way with that schedule. That Eagles game, Chad, in week 17, it's in between 2 Washington Commander games. So like again, just catching the Eagles in a bad spot when they're going to be really focused on their division, obviously, if the Commanders be the team that everyone talks about them being this season. So it felt like it's all breaking Buffalo's way. And you're right. Like they're a team that, this window for them, it's going to be what, 2 to 3 years here if they do this rebuild right. Like they've kind of gone in a new direction where, the offense, it's really about, Cook and Josh Allen doing Josh Allen things. And then defensively, they're paying all their young guys. So I'm really excited to see the direction of this team that's built in the next 2 to 3 years. Because, yeah, it feels like every year we're going to be saying, is this it? Like, is this finally the year this cursed franchise gets over the hump? And if there's one guy to do it, it's going to be Superman himself, Josh Allen. Like, he's got it all, Chad. Last year, he was an inch short. This year, we'll see if he gets that extra inch and makes his way to the Super Bowl.
what do we think of early season buys versus late season buys? You mentioned the Bears. I feel like the Bears are getting screwed here. But how does that play out historically, Warren?
Well, more teams now have been able to request their preference in terms of when they take a buy. All the international teams are allowed to request exactly when they want to buy. And then other teams can kind of file a request in the NFL. It wasn't long ago. I mean, I guess it was. We're getting old now. But like in the early 2000s, when they first did division realignment, there was 4 teams that had to buy every single week from week 3 to week 10. And that was it. 4, 4, 4, 4 every single week. Now we've got 4 teams in week 14 that have a bye. And we've got 4 teams in week 12 that had a bye. And we got a couple teams in week 11 that had a bye. Last year was a little bit more skewed to the end of the season. We had 6 teams in week 12 that had a bye and 6 teams in week 14 that had a bye. This year, we don't have that. Each of the last 2 years, just as a little note for anybody who cares, 0 bye weeks, week 13. They try to get everybody playing on that Thanksgiving Day weekend. So they don't have buys. Then they have buys the week before that. They have buys the week after that, and then it ends. But there have been some teams with the 17-game schedule that, and only one team getting a first-round bye in the playoffs, that have done some homework internally and thought to themselves, it might be more advantageous to have a bye later on in the season. We wouldn't want to have a bye, let's say week 4, week 5, week 6, and then have to go all through the playoffs, not have a shot at like being the first overall seed, and then playing all the way through until the Super Bowl, having had no extra week off since, early October. Many teams are trying to avoid that by requesting a bye a lot later, but then you just have to survive until, week 12, week 14. So I don't know that we have enough data because they just started doing these week 14 buys. The first season they started doing that was 2021. So we don't have a whole lot of data to show how much that helps these teams yet, but it definitely has been a growing trend with the extra game that they added to the schedule of some teams requesting to have buys later in the year.
Yeah, you look at how physical these games are and the way these players get beat up, and you really marvel at the fact so many years went by without bye weeks. And these guys were just going week after week after week for 16 game schedules. I'm not talking about the 60s and 70s when it was 14 games. Like the bye is probably saving years on people's careers because Simon, this is a brutal, brutal game.
Yeah, and we talk all the time too about how there's no mystery here. The reason the 1 or 2 seeds usually make a far run in the playoffs, right? Usually because they're going to rest the guy early or they get that bye week. Like it's not like, remember like years ago, it used to be, well, we don't know if we want to rest players because we don't want them to lose their rhythm. That's kind of died out now, especially with the extended season that we've had where teams are just, no, like we just need to make it to that, get the rest. I mean, my favorite ever will always be Detroit last year, right? They didn't take off the final week of the season because Campbell's a psycho. He wanted to lose that rhythm. They had the bye week, and then they couldn't find it against Washington. So, that is something that does happen. But, yeah, my view of it, like my most interesting takeaway, especially with what we're talking about here, is that, there's certain teams that you want to look at, they're not on the main stage. Like last year, a team that jumped out that I got really wrong was the Vikings, right? The Vikings had basically no primetime games. They're a team that pretty standard schedule, Chad. Always 1 o'clock, maybe 4:30s, but they had a pretty simple setup. That year, a team this year that really jumps out to me, it's a unicorn team, is Tennessee. A team that took the number one quarterback, number one pick, 0 games outside of that window. I don't even think they gave him a Thursday game, Chad. Tennessee. So this is a team in a very unique scenario of very simple all season, 1 o'clock, 4:30, Sunday. I love that for a team that I'm very interested in this upcoming season in Tennessee. So those are the type of things where I'm like, again, once I get Warren's book, I'll dive into his information on Tennessee because that jumped out to me right away of huge advantage. A team that no one's talking about, boring Cam Ward, barely talked about in the draft. The scheduling guys reflected that, giving them 0 primetime games. I could not believe when I saw it.
Well, Tennessee and New Orleans, the only teams without primetime games this year. Simon, you and I have talked in abundance about the Tennessee Titans at 8-1 in the AFC South, where honestly anything can happen, and there's no reason why they couldn't be the Texans of 2 years ago. I'm glad you mentioned Warren's book, so I can remind people. Go to sharp.football, use promo code ACTION, get his preseason Bible for $1. $1. That's ridiculous. I mean, you're basically giving away the best preseason football book that there is. Warren, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed of yourself.
I don't want to even promote the book. You did a great job of that. I appreciate that. I just want to get on my soapbox for 1 second about the bye weeks and just say one more thing about these bye weeks. Teams care about when their bye week is, and they're trying to focus on it. And we know there are 17 games, and we know that only one team has a bye in the playoffs. Teams need to play every single game that they play a little bit more focused on the fact that if we're up big, we can take our starters out and they avoid all the wear and tear. Injuries are going to happen league-wide. You never know when a player is going to get injured. But what you do know is that they're more likely to be injured if they're playing 100% of their snaps because the game is close all the way to that final whistle. The 2022 Philadelphia Eagles were a prime example of this, jumping out to big leads early in games so they could rest their guys. They could stay healthier in the season. They made it all the way to the Super Bowl. Obviously, we know it didn't end the way that it did just this past year, but the Philadelphia Eagles are a great example. More teams need to be aggressive early in games to jump out to leads, to be up at halftime, to put games to bed by the middle of the third quarter so they can rest these guys to get through the season. I don't know why it's not a bigger focus. Teams want to be ahead. Their number one priority is being ahead at the final whistle after 60 minutes. Their priority should be to be up by double digits entering the fourth quarter. That would help their players stay a lot healthier throughout the course of the season. And I wish more teams cared about that than they do.
Look, you're preaching to the choir, Warren, because that would also mean a lot more backdoor covers. So everybody wins. Start resting your starters. NFL coaches, Warren Sharp, thanks for coming on. Simon and I will return with our next episode of The Favorites Thursday on the Action Network YouTube page. Download us from Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your pods. Rate, review, subscribe, leave us 5 stars, say whatever you want. Feedback is the gift. Until next time, love you.